Hi, I'm Minity Healy, NC State Group Coordinator, here to talk about an emotion-focused pre-group outline that I typically use, as well as some of my logic and ways of thinking about this process. So hopefully you can take parts of this that feel relevant to your groups and use it as you see fit. As well, I'll talk about one of the first interventions that I do in my first session USO appointments, just to give that more context to any of the reference sheets that I provide. So in my mind, one of the first tasks, other than establishing a relationship with the client themselves, is to focus on the client's emotional expression within the session. Are they overregulated with emotion or underregulated? And I'll often introduce this by saying, let me give you a frame for today. There's going to be two main parts to this. One of them is us explaining what the group is like, giving you a clear structure, painting you a picture of this process. You don't leave with a lot of questions, as well as getting a sense of your individual and work goals for groups that could align with what you're hearing. So I'll often talk to them about theory first and say, groups theory essentially is that the way that you think, feel, and act outside of group naturally will recreate in this group, because this is a process group and there's a lot of openness to it. You kind of fall into your comfortable social role. So if you're overly accommodating, you're pretty passive to other people, then you're going to lean back, you're going to wait to see what happens, and you're probably going to stay in that distant space. If you're one who quells anxiety by being more active, engaged, or you worry sometimes about being seen as abrasive by others, then you may say things, you may be more in the fray and have that same kind of pattern occur. So it's more just to normalize this experience, not to say that it's wrong that one person is distant and the other person is active. In this space, what I look to do is really find acceptance and say, you are this way for a reason. You've adapted to life in the best way that you have known, and this is just the way that you play out in our current environment. Even if it's not effective for connecting, that's kind of the point of the group. It's like, let's bring awareness to it. My goal in group, personally, is not to change people so much as to foster awareness of what's happening, and not so much what they say, but why they say it, when they say it, how they say it, and how that protects them from perceived threat, real or not real. Like it's real for them subjectively, and that way they can continue to be aware and make choices if they feel like they want to choose to act differently or try out a different hat or way of being in a relationship in the world or with themselves. So how we do that essentially is by putting everybody's immediate thoughts, feelings, urges, body sensations, fantasies about other members in relationship associations. Somebody reminds you of like your romantic partner because they, I don't know, cut you off when you're speaking, then to name that as it comes up spontaneously in the present moment, as much as possible, staying present with your experience in the room, while also being curious about other members and their reactions to you. So if you think somebody sees you as annoying, most of the time you would maybe be quiet because you wouldn't want to like confirm that, and that would feel really sad or frustrating. But in this group, we want you to ask for that feedback, like if you're concerned, because two things are going to happen. Either your narrative is going to be challenged and the person's going to say, I didn't find you annoying at all, actually. I kind of found it comforting. You were sharing stuff about your family and I really resonated with it. And I was just really silent because I was surprised that I didn't feel like the only one here, the hard like family life. Or they'll say, I did find you kind of frustrating, but then the group leader or other members will be curious as to why, like what part of you felt annoying, because you as a whole are not annoying, right? That's shame-inducing when we generalize the entirety of your character with a feeling or an emotional state. But the part of you that maybe interrupted them or maybe decided to talk about your own family drama while not reflecting anything that you heard from them first, those parts are both changeable and flexible. And so that allows a lot more comfort in terms of like your autonomy and awareness as to like, oh, I see, there's some things I just am not consciously aware of that I lean into. And you could lean into that for all kinds of valid reasons based on your past experiences. So with that, it's really important to hold a strong frame for group. We ask that there's no outside relationships within the group. And in the first session, you'll always ask, does anybody here recognize one another from another space? Because sure enough, you will always find two people, like even though it's a huge university, that happen to be in the same D&D game together. And you'll have to talk about it. What was the extent of the relationship? Is it ongoing? is it going to be problematic for this dynamic, and to give them permission to speak to you afterwards if they're not comfortable with fully admitting the extent of the relationship in the session. So the reason why we provide this safe container is because it allows us to experiment and to place unique kinds of emotions into the room that we normally would not want to share. If I have to see you, or if you're my roommate, I don't want to get you angry. I see you and I don't want to live in that tense space. But if I see that this is the only context of our relationship, I might feel more comfortable with doing that. It'll still be hard, but slightly more comfortable. Same with intimacy, which, when we get into attraction, or whether that's emotional, sexual, or what have you, that's a lot of anxiety and a lot of risk taking. So by not having any outside relationship, by saying we are not here to date, we're not allowed to do that while you're in this group process, and even afterwards, allowing people to, be clear in setting boundaries if they only want this to be a one-off experience and not keep any further contact, provide some safety for us to explore parts of ourselves that it's difficult to do with others when there's relationships on the line. I know members in the past have spoken about not wanting to speak with certain members because they're afraid of what they'll think of them. They'll have these narratives of people like her wouldn't like people like me. And that can be really powerful and meaningful to be able to explore in this space and to be able to challenge that narrative belief that you're unworthy of somebody's affection just because you find them attractive in different ways. And at the same time, also gives people the space to express anger and rebuff if they feel objectified and, misused or stated as, being an object of someone's affection without, getting to know them enough or feeling like there's not enough trust or intimacy in that. Both sides of those coins are really valuable in the space and something you can't really experiment without a safe container. So I'll often go into an experiential example, and you can use whatever you want, and it'll really depend on your group, I imagine, in the context. I typically use one where there's an interpersonal relationship dynamic where a partner is overwhelmed and could be seen as needy or controlling. So for me, mine is typically if there's, you can change the gender identities, the race. I think all that actually adds more complexity and dynamicism based on, how you want to express what's on your mind as a therapist in this. So if there's a, Asian female, like cisgender female, who's in a heterosexual relationship and she's talking about her partner, a white male, who's very concerned about her and in terms of where she goes at night. This is pre-corona, but you can use post-corona examples, obviously. You can paint a picture and say that she comes into session, often feeling frustrated, saying things like, I'm just annoyed that my partner constantly has to know everything about where I am. I mean, I've never cheated on him, I've never been untrustworthy, and yet I constantly feel like he doesn't take anything I say, and is constantly worried about me, like, I don't know, going off and like cheating on him with somebody else. I was going to the library the other day and to study with a group of people, and he said, like, well, how late are you going to be there? Like, are there going to be any guys there? I don't think it's a good idea to go there that late at night. And I'm like, I think I could control myself. And yeah, there's going to be a guy. There's like 7 of us, but it's really okay. Like, and so as Lindsay shares this story, I'll often ask the person who's in the pre-group. So most of the time in group, when things are working really well, people will spontaneously jump in with their thoughts, feelings about Lindsay in that moment. But I might ask, if there's a pause, how are people feeling towards Lindsay in that moment? And no matter what they say, this is a really great way for you to walk them through how this group is different when we use interpersonal process as opposed to regular support groups or advice giving. Because often what will happen is they'll maybe ask for clarification from the person, say, oh, I'd like to know more about their partner's relationship. And that's very normal. And you want to like validate that. And, again, it comes from a place maybe even of caring. Like when people give advice, I often say, that's really sweet of you. I can tell you really don't want them to be in that like emotional pain and turmoil. And so nothing wrong with that. But how it might be different is I might ask you, I sense that you're really trying to get Lindsay out of this painful like impasse with her partner. But what are you feeling towards her right now? What are you feeling in this moment as you hear her with her partner? And there can be fear of safety, anger at the partner, all kinds of emotions. And I often try and differentiate the frame and say, often when we're in these dialogues, we have emotions towards another person and we have emotions about ourselves. And so you have anger at her partner and maybe a fear for her. But what do you feel about yourself? When you see someone who's in an aggravated or helpless or uncertain position, like how do you feel hearing that and sitting by? And so that can lead up to them feeling helpless, feeling like they connect with that because of their own emotional experiences and relationships. And all of that can be really meaningful to be able to differentiate that frame. You might have to also, the added element to this is I say, well, let's take it a step further and say that Lindsay, tells the story, but you have met Lindsay for several sessions now and notice that she tends to, be pretty dismissive of comments in general. Every time you try and approach her for help, she's pretty quick to dismiss it, says she doesn't need it, says you're being like overly sensitive, and you feel hurt, you feel frustrated at that, and you do feel concerned about her consistently throughout the group. So maybe you identify more with what her partner is saying. It's not our job to find out what's right in this group, or was the partner more right, or is Lindsay right? The goal is to express how you feel, and how would it be for you to express your feeling of frustration towards Lindsay in that case. And also maybe, again, to express curiosity about what this means for her in terms of how she navigates the space or the room and the relationships based on some of her cultural or socio-political background in this sphere that we live in. So I'll often ask, again, how's your relationship with anger currently? What did it look like when you were younger in your family? It's really great to be able to understand and gain a sense of a person's culture, where they were from, were the parents avoidant, did they escalate anger with insults and it always felt toxic? What would you do when they were angry, and what would happen if you did the opposite? So if I would go in my room and hide and lock the door, I'd ask well, what would you do if you confronted them or if you told them to stop? And if that led to them being hurt, and again, you're really getting a sense of okay, so we understand that this person most likely, if there's conflict or tension, will retreat or be silent in the group. And so we can be kind of aware of that and cognizant of that process for them, and also validate and be accepting of it, not see it as something that is as frustrating maybe for us as group leaders to see. And so we can ask also, how does that match how you deal with anger today, right? To connect that past to present, because there can be growth and there can be shifts from childhood to adulthood. Not all things stick completely, and it'd be good to get that sense of how is this impacting them in their current relationship. Same thing with intimacy, right? How is intimacy expressed within your family, towards others? What would it be like if you expressed it in the group space with other people? If that was either receiving intimacy, people saying that they really care about you, they really they really love this part of you, this spontaneity, this playfulness, or if they were expressing emotional attraction, sexual attraction, physical attraction, how would that feel? And again, getting at the models of intimacy within their parental or their significant caregiver relationships. Were they cold, stoic, they showed us affection in culturally specific ways, which is, again, not to say that there's this right way that we want them to be, but more as a way of building awareness and understanding to that. Or were they openly affectionate to others? My daughter recently had started, she's about 2.5 right now, but when she was around 2, she would do this adorable thing at night where I would kiss her goodnight, and when mom and I were putting her to bed, and she would say, "Mommy," as a way to signal me you need to kiss her now. And so there would just be this really warm feeling of intimacy is great. We should share it. This should be something you want to see others that you care about love each other. And again, I think about what messages we get even from a prenatal standpoint, which we can't remember mentally, cognitively. I don't remember, I think my earliest memory is in kindergarten. But all those experiences, they build up narratives, they build up beliefs. And so trying to recognize, have to make sense of this. And it's not coming from a cognitive place. It's from this emotional core, adaptive system inside of each of us, this inner child that I like to kind of frame it as, in the analytical mind or the emotional focused, inner child mind. So again, the goal is to bring awareness to these adaptations, these defenses. I like to call them adaptations, so it sounds a little more positive in tone, because I do think they're really productive in a lot of ways that were helpful really earlier in life and may unconsciously push us away from engaging or make us not want to be as fully present with our experiences, even though things are very different now. And then I also like to say what happens outside of group. One of the field theories is that the different fields and systems that we're in, they impact one another. There's like an isomorphy in which these things get transferred to one another. So if there's racism, sexism in larger society, which we know to be true, ableism and such, then that is going to manifest in the group. And this is important. Again, like for me, a white cisgender heterosexual male leader having a lot of privilege, I think to name this up front and to say that I don't want to cause harm, and I certainly won't like plan to do anything intentionally like that to elicit emotion from people. But I'd be remiss to say that I can guarantee that I won't like unintentionally cause harm through a microaggression or through carelessness or dropping like someone, right? It may not be very overt, but I may play into some of these dynamics that the larger US or world culture has. And so how would it be to engage in dialogues with this topic? And depending on your group members' identities and what they share, it'd be maybe more important to focus on like more salient identities than others, just to like be able to connect with that, see how they're feeling about you sharing about this in the space, like even to begin with. To me, this is really important because it sets an expectation that these dialogues are not off the table, because often, like if you don't bring it up as a leader, no one is going to bring it up in group. Almost nobody, like will bring it up on their own. So having that sense of safety and that you're aware of this, you're going to name it if you see it, just again gives a sense of comfort and reassurance that this is a space in which maybe you can have these difficult conversations with someone who's understanding and warm and empathic. And I always like to end in terms of saying like each member and group in a way is another frame of reference, point of reference for someone else in your life. This is an opportunity for you to challenge your narratives that you have in your mind, which is why it's important that, again, no matter what you think, no matter how illogical or paranoid it sounds to say it, we want you to name it. Because if we can name it, we can tame it. If we recognize it, we can challenge it. And so accepting that we are this way for a reason lets us own those parts and say those things that maybe bring up guilt or shame or sadness that I know I shouldn't feel anxious, but I do. I do feel anxious when people say that they care for me. And owning that is going to be better and helpful for your growth. So then I'll often ask, so what have you been working on in your sessions with people previously, or what do you hope to get out of group? How does this outline that I've given you kind of align with your goals? And so in essence, it doesn't give a ton of time, as you could imagine, for people to really focus on their specific goals. But most of the time, I found that this is so comprehensive that people will often point to the things that they heard and say, I could see how the anger part could be really helpful for me, and the intimacy, it's been really difficult in my relationships, platonic or otherwise. And just working on assertiveness or other kinds of interpersonal factors. Hopefully before this, people have been kind of highlighting why group is useful in terms of taking the insight that you might get in an individual and putting it into action, because you can't escape the group dynamic, right? Like you will almost certainly be reactive, or even if you're non-reactive and numb, that's still a reaction to what's in front of you. And we can be curious about that and really use that as a space for intentional growth, practical growth experience. So I think that's my view overall on the pre-group appointment. Just as a little bonus, this is something, again, I find really helpful. I'll give an outline to this as well in this email or message attachments. But when I start the first session, I often, I think I got this from somebody at Appalachian State. It was just an AGPA talk I saw online like years ago. But it was essentially talking about these 3 levels of emotional expression that they said were coined from Fritz Perls, who's very colloquial, and he's kind of, a character. So they would say, emotional expression we want in groups. I'm going to help you clarify and try and be more specific about what your emotion is towards you, towards other people. But what we don't want are these 3 levels. And so I'll explain what those are. Chicken shit, emotional expression. It's essentially the kind of emotional expression you'd say to a grocer on your way out of the store when they say, how's your day going today? You go, it's fine. Good. Good. Like 1-word answer. I want to end this conversation. I don't want to be here anymore. And that doesn't give us anything to work with, essentially. So that will not be enough in terms of being open and curious about what you're feeling internally through this process. Bullshit emotional expression is slightly better in terms of saying I'm feeling a little worried, a little, or it's more along the lines of a like or dislike in terms of like, oh, I appreciate that you said that. Or like, no, that feels good. Or it feels bad. It feels weird, strange, uncomfortable, very vague, very amorphous. Could be a lot of different things, right? Strange, uncomfortable is, as one of my old colleagues would say, is a luggage suitcase full of emotions that we could open up and explore together. And so when I think of that, I want to get a sense of like, how are you feeling about yourself in this moment when you hear someone speak? How do you feel towards somebody else? And instead of being broad and general, the reason why we do these kinds of things, say good, bad, weird, strange, is it doesn't commit us to those more sensitive emotional states, the sadness, the anxiety, the disgust, the anger. Even if you start broad with those categories and then you help out your group members, give them more vocabulary throughout the process, it can be really powerful to be able to get that. And the last one is elephant shit, donkey shit, emotional expression, which is the idea of politics, religion, or any kind of other system like focused identities. And what I mean by that is not that anything is off the table to talk about, not that you have to eschew or get rid of any of your identities. You can't. And you can't escape the political world, right? We talked about the field theory where things in the larger field affect us in group. So the goal here is, though, rather than getting into a stuck point of us versus them and talking about political figures or figures outside of the room, saying like, if I say I'm a, supporter of this political candidate, immediately people are going to have all kinds of assumptions about me. Can't believe you believe this. I can't believe you support this. This makes you a monster for doing this. I don't even want to be in this therapy group anymore. I don't feel safe. And that all, again, like posits you as a generalization in this camp and loses you as an individual person. Now, if they do say things, or if they like, there's something that they're doing to you in the group that is harmful or hurtful, or you feel scared that they might believe those things right there in that moment, that's good. That's your experience right now, your emotions. You can name that. You can be curious about that. But the idea of doing in this, I'm right and I have to correct you, or I have to make you believe what I believe, tends to get us into more of a philosophical and heady space as opposed to this emotionally connective space and group. So again, nothing off the table, and you should absolutely express your emotions towards how other individuals in the room are affecting you as themselves in that moment. And then the last thing I'll say is I often go through each member and try and do these series of 4 questions. Sometimes I do 3, sometimes I do 5, but these 4 I think are like the crux of what I really love to get at. If there's time, you can adjust this based on how many members you have and how much time you have at this point, once you've gone through confidentiality and boundary setting and done those like group standard norms. But I like to ask again, how do you feel about yourself being here, towards yourself here right now? What are your goals or hopes for the group? And you can be brief, short, vague, not really interested in challenging people or giving them, pushes to be more specific, because I think this just gives us a good metric as to where people are at. And it's early, right? Trust is still being formed. I like to think of this again in terms of how do I increase people's curiosity about what part of another member reminds them of someone else significant in their life or of themselves in some way. And so if you ask that question, like lean into the absurdity of it. If they feel like, I just met people, I'm the first one to go, I don't really know who reminds me of anybody in here, no one else has really spoken, say like, yeah, it's super hard. So if it's physical, if it's, just give us, something that you notice that maybe you're fantasizing about, because I don't know either anybody here that like really connects with you at this point. And so like lean into that with them, but have them like give it a go and just name what that is. And if they say, you remind me of my cousin, the way that you speak or the way that you generally look, somebody I was really close to when I was younger, I would lean into that and say, well, tell them about your cousin. Tell them what kinds of like feelings you had growing up with them and how that was for you. And so you get that, again, connection of being able to talk like fondly about somebody to another member, which I think builds a bridge for this positive transference, even though it's based on something maybe initially superficial. Also gets them usually talking about somebody warm and affectionate most of the time when they're discussing with one another. I know for another instance, like when groups are homogeneous, mostly, whether that's like racial identity or others, this can be a really difficult like sticking point and really important again to highlight the okayness you have in terms of like knowing where group members are at. Like I had a Black female, identified Haitian female that spoke about nobody really reminds me of anybody. Nobody actually here looks like me. And so I'm not really connecting or feeling any kind of way about other members. And I think that's really important. Like, and so like saying like, I appreciate you sharing that. And I'm like, I'm feeling some sadness around that. Like for me, just like that, how that experience would be. And she was pretty quick to say like, I don't feel sad about it. It's just the way life is. It's the way I am. I don't think it's a big deal. And that's okay, right? You don't have to convince her. My goal is not to make her me, like, and make her more emotionally fuzzy in that way. It's just to say like, here's my subjective experience, what I have as a model. And then also like being respectful and understanding as to like, yeah, it makes sense. You haven't really felt that. And that's not been something that brings up concern for you right now. Like, or, maybe ever, right? Because this is the way that you've been able to adapt to your culture, your way of being, as I have. So lastly, you want to ask about a feeling towards another person. And notice that group members will always want to go vague and broad with this question. Say, everyone here sounds really nice. Everyone seems really great. I'm really excited to get to know everybody. I've connected with everybody in different ways. So really push them, though, to be specific to one person and one emotion like towards them. I mean, you could do, I guess, more than one emotion. But most of the time, it's very difficult. And they'll often still say things like, oh, I feel good about knowing them. And so you can reinforce that. It's a little of the bullshitty, like, dislike, good, bad emotion. Let's be a little more specific. What does it bring to you? And help them out. Don't let them just sit there struggling. It could be comforting to see another person who's talked about being a mom while in school, or it could be, just really reassuring or validating to hear somebody else struggle with being an other in a space, when they're the only maybe other of a different kind of identity that's hidden to the group. So this is all, again, a way for you to find methods for there to be links and connections. The goal at the end of this first session, ultimately, no matter what strategies or interventions you use, is to leave the group members with a sense of, I feel connected or I feel excited about coming back to see this person. I want to learn more about them. I'm curious about them, but there's possibilities here. And there's like a hope for something to form between themselves and other members in the group. Often when I do checkouts, if there's time, again, this can be hard in the first session. Among other things, I'll ask for a takeaway, a highlight of the group, who you feel most connected to in this moment. And then if there's anything left unsaid to a member, you can say it in a brief sentence. And you can change those. Again, I don't use the same ones each time, but that's like generally what I might ask. And I think that provides more opportunities for connection, linking, saying you're most connected to someone, and again, pushing them to be forced to that choice. It can bring up frustration and annoyance, and they can say, I don't feel about anybody differently. And I could talk about, like, again, in different ways, how you can highlight that resistance and, be able to say it's understandable, and you can like invite the anger, actually like coax it out in terms of like, what are they experiencing when I push them in that way, and invite other people in. It sounds frustrating. Throughout this whole process, you should always be looking at the other members in the room and thinking to yourself, is somebody nodding while this person speaks? And just ask, like, what are you connecting with? I noticed you nodding. Like, let those things naturally happen. I'm not really a big structure person, although this may seem really structured. It's easy to, kind of bounce around. And by the end of it, if you keep track of things like I do, you'll have an entire conspiracy drawing of connections from the different group members, which I think leads to a good start to this process that will be mostly open and unstructured moving forward. So you'll set that clear expectation as well. So anyway, hope it was helpful for those watching. And yeah, thanks. Feel free to message me with any comments, thoughts, or things that you thought I missed, because I'd love to continue to learn from this process. Take care.